Hi everybody, it's me. Survived the Jive, I'm back after a long break. I've been away filming a new film about the Anatolian Earth Mother. And I was in Turkey for a couple of weeks. And I've just had a lot of other stuff on, getting ready, house stuff and whatnot, so I haven't had a chance to stream. So I'm sorry about that. But here I am now. And I'm afraid it's not with good news. It's one of those streams where I have to talk about something I'd rather not talk about. It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel sick, physically sick. Actually, when I was collecting all the research for it, and when I first found out about it, I'm referring to a trend in academia, of course, that you may have heard about. And I'm not talking about just one event, although there is one specific event in the last 2 months that's a lot of the stream will be about. There's other things as well, and I think that without getting too conspiratorial, it is rather coincidental that these different criticisms of the word Anglo-Saxon and of Anglo-Saxon historiography as it's conventionally been conceived are occurring at the same time. So I'll simply go through them and in the order that I encountered them myself, so that you may come to your own conclusions as I have about what's going on. The last stream I didn't drink beer, and some people said, "Oh, you're not drinking beer, just water." Well, this time I'm back on the beer, and I recommend you pour yourself a drink because you're going to need one when I tell you all this stuff. Wait a second though. Let me just say, for the people who aren't familiar with my channel, because I always assume everyone's an old-time subscriber, because I've been doing this. This channel was started in 2006, and it really gained its current character in around 2009. So it's an old channel, but a lot of people here have only been, haven't been around so long. So I'm Thomas Rousel. I'm a historian. I'm an Anglo-Saxonist, which is a term that's suddenly become controversial, apparently. I studied medieval history for my MA in 2012 at UCL, and I focused on Anglo-Saxons. For example, a couple of courses I did, my language course I did Old English, and one of my modules was Anglo-Saxon court culture. I found that very interesting. I'm interested in Anglo-Saxon history, and I did a film after graduating, a documentary film about how Anglo-Saxons and specifically the old pagan ways, the Anglo-Saxons even, were foundational to the English nation, and by extension the British nation, which grew out of it in the early modern era. I consider history, as has been considered by most civilizations, in fact all civilizations throughout history, whether the Chinese or the Roman or whatever, history has always been seen as a way to understand oneself and one's culture, and it shores up an identity, and it helps us to feel a belonging to our culture, to each other, a sense of responsibility to each other. It gives people dignity. It prevents them feeling, alienated, isolated. For atomization, which is now an unfortunate trend of the modern world. And although I admit that nationalistic perspectives can sometimes distort history and cause people to misread and some things, to downplay certain events and exaggerate others, I still also maintain that the desire to feel pride in one's ancestors is natural and healthy, and also an excellent motivator for many people to become involved in studying history. And I also think that history and the study and teaching of history has a responsibility to foster a sense of pride and therefore dignity in a people, and that should be done by all peoples all over the world, and that is not, in my opinion, a remotely controversial or hateful thing to say. It's simply a fact of what history is for, and that's what if you look at ancient historians, that's how they saw things. They saw things very much like I do. It's a perfectly natural thing. the culture of criticism, the culture of critical theory that is now pervasive in academia, would describe what I've just said as problematic. Problematic's a very good word to use if you want to sound clever without having to actually use your brain, because it just means I don't like it, or it's it's difficult for me to agree with because it goes against my belief system. So instead of going into detail about why my fundamental beliefs about the universe are in opposition to those that other person presents, I simply say it's problematic, and use other buzzwords and stuff that academics or pseudo intellectuals tend to use. Now, to the stream tonight isn't all about political correctness and the anti-racism and stuff, which has part of the trend for attacking Anglo-Saxons. I'm going to go into that in the second part. The first part I'm going to look at is this other attack on Anglo-Saxons, which is also recent, and it's just silly, but it's coming from quite prominent academics. I would say that the first part is an attack in the field of archaeology, and the second attack, the one which concerns invoking the powerful magical terms like racism and colonialism of the modern era, that's concerning with medievalism, which is essentially history. I'm a medievalist because, for those who aren't aware, not academics who watch this, medievalism generally refers to people who study medieval history, so it's historians rather than archaeologists. Although I'm sure there are some archaeologists who describe themselves as medievalists too, because obviously it means you have a focus on the medieval. But archaeology is quite the skills in archaeology can be applied more readily to different areas of history than perhaps than historians. If you specialise in medieval history, you can't quite so easily branch out into other areas. Although that's precisely what I've tried to do myself, although albeit outside of academia entirely, and in the field of YouTube films instead. But the first person on trial today is a woman by the name of Susan Oosthuizen. So let me just get the judge of this outing to come. So, Judge, will you hear the case for Susan Oosthuizen? Very good, Judge Radwald. Thank you for your magnanimous and generous attendance to this case. Well, there was an article published in issue 355 of Current Archaeology, and that is also online on archaeology, on an archaeology website. It's called archaeology.co.uk. Perhaps you're fed up with looking at my mug, and I'll just give you the display. Here we go. Where's it going? There we go. So, time to axe the Anglo-Saxons, rethinking the migration period. So this was posted at the end of September, and it's by Chris Catling for archaeology.co.uk, and it's basically based on a book that was published quite recently by Susan Oosthuizen called The Emergence of the English. And the theory contained within is one I reject entirely, because I have, unlike her, an understanding of the various kinds of DNA evidence that have come out in recent years and their significance, both looking at modern English people's DNA, modern British people's DNA in general, and ancient DNA. There's plenty of ancient samples from the British Isles. In fact, people in genetics quite frequently complain about how much attention has been focused on modern and ancient samples from the British Isles compared to other parts of the world. It is certainly a part of the world that is overrepresented when it comes to genetic science and population genetics. However, that doesn't mean that there's enough. There's never enough samples. You can always get more information, and it's all very interesting. And as an Anglo-Saxonist, I am happy to see more stuff come out, and I think there should be a lot more. But I can see why, since other parts of the world have very little, they are still a bit annoyed by this. So she makes claims. She completely ignores any DNA evidence. It's like it doesn't exist. This entire article Chris has here, and also her book. Instead, she focuses on material culture, and she makes claims about Germanic-style jewelry, including the following. Brooches that we describe as Germanic can be seen in museums all over the former Roman Empire, indeed even in Rome itself. The style has a much wider distribution than the term implies. Recent research, for example by Toby Martin, has demonstrated that brooches that look Germanic may have been imported initially, but became increasingly popular and were then reproduced by local craftsmen, evolving over the 6th and 7th centuries into better designed and more complicated insular forms that were worn across England, an index of regional taste and fashion, not of immigrant ethnicity. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa then, lady. What is the difference between that and the actual theory of the Anglo-Saxons? The Anglo-Saxon, in theory, is a bunch of Germanic people came, mixed with the Celtic people a bit, and that Germanic culture, material culture, became popular, that was dominant there, and then it developed within the English environment into its own thing, its own unique Anglo-Saxon. You could say Anglo-Saxon to mean not just Angles and Saxons, but the combination of all the Germanic peoples of the British Isles and the unique combined culture of Germanic culture that developed within the British Isles. But that's pretty much what she's described, actually. That more complicated insular forms that were worn across England developed there and were a regional taste. That doesn't but not of an immigrant ethnicity. Well, they were initially. Obviously we know that because we can see that they come from, with DNA, we can see that they come with the DNA. They come at the same time as the DNA. The people who bring that DNA bring this new style of art. That style of art is termed Germanic quite uncontroversially because it is the style of art associated with Germanic-speaking people or people of Germanic heritage or attached culturally to the Germanic world. She also points out, indeed, even Rome itself has such things, of course, because there were Germanic invaders in Rome in the migration era, of course. The Lombards, etc. What is this? Is this an academic? What is this? How can you make this how can you say stuff like this? This is simple. Like, I'm not going to pretend I'm a really, distinguished academic. I'm not. I'm just, I only have an MA. I haven't got any published books or anything. Have never, published a groundbreaking theory that's changed anything in the field. Nothing of the kind. I'm just a filmmaker who happens to have a master's degree in history. But this is obvious to me, and I've been around, Europe to museums to see Germanic artwork. I can see the similarities between Gothic brooches from the continent and Anglo-Saxon brooches. It's evidently the same thing. I can see the similarities between Vendel-era helmets from Sweden and the Sutton Hoo helmet. Evidently the same thing. Of course, we can see obviously that there are parallels in the development of the early Germanic art in the Iron Age with other parts of the world. But Germanic, this is like, that doesn't make a difference because it's still a Germanic art, because this style of helmet, for example, come from late Roman cavalry helmets, but they are not late Roman cavalry helmets. They are a Germanic reimagining of that style, and then that style distributes with the Germanic people in the migration era. The migration era was not the spreading of Roman people into the Germanic lands. It was not. It was the spread of Germanic people and Slavic peoples, etc., but mainly of Germanic people. It's associated very much with that. I shouldn't have to say this. I'm sure she knows all this stuff already, so one wonders why she is making this very flimsy argument. They were produced locally because the local material culture was German. This idea of pots not people, it's called in archaeology. It's an old one, picks up after the war. Like pots are not people. Sounds clever, doesn't it? But it's not really clever. You could say something like, oh, well, in the future, if we find a McDonald's wrapper, then we know that means an American was there. And they use that as an example because, of course, McDonald's could be anywhere. But that's stupid because, I mean, now we've got genetic science. It's not 2009 anymore. We live in a world with genome-wide analysis. We can see now that the spread of material cultures is very, very often, not always, but very often connected to the spread of a race or a people. It's spread of humans, especially in prehistoric times or any pre-literate societies. If you see a new culture, a material culture emerge, it's usually with a new people coming into the area. And people like David Reich and the Harvard team have proven that. It's not really contested. You can't contest it anymore, but you can pretend it doesn't exist. You can just pretend it never happened and stick your fingers in your ears and live like it's 2008, but it isn't. Miss Oosthuizen. I don't know how to pronounce that name. I think it's Dutch. Susan Oosthuizen. I'm not trying to be rude to her by mispronouncing her name. I genuinely just too much of an Anglo to understand a foreign word. I'll come back to the use of the term Anglo just then. I described myself as an Anglo, which is... there's a whole load of things to unpack there. It's very controversial. Like, a lot of the PC people hate it when English people describe themselves as Anglo-Saxons, and I can see in a way why. In a way, I agree with them, but not really. But I'll go into that in a bit. Let's focus on Susan Oosthuizen first. Just to, instead of just taking my word for it on this this business about this DNA. Let me just give you some examples to prove it, because you should never take people's word for it. You should always ask for evidence. All right, what we got here? A couple of articles from 2016. Iron Age and Anglo-Saxon genomes from East England reveal British migration history. That was from 10 individuals in Cambridge in East England, and they conclude that on average, the contemporary East English population derived 30% of its ancestry from Anglo-Saxon migrations. So, it's pretty solid science. You get 10 Anglo-Saxon people, and you can see that they're not like... The Anglo-Saxon samples are closely related to Dutch and Danish people, while the Iron Age samples, the earlier British samples, are much more like Northern European people from Britain. So, where, you can say that's a small sample size, but that's just one study of many that have been done. And you can't contest it. Like, 40%, 38% on average, so there's people with more than that, that's an enormous amount. That is not a small amount. Let me just go back into it. She is, because I can't go through that whole article with her, but I'll try and paraphrase it. She's trying to say this, that she's not saying that the Germanic people weren't there. She's saying that there was a really complicated post-Roman Britain had, firstly, she's saying that the Roman civilization didn't disappear. It was actually quite well preserved in parts of the country, and there was an ongoing Roman civilized culture, with an organized and efficient. It wasn't like a Mad Max wasteland. Okay, actually, I'm fine. I think there's not. She's probably right there. I'm sure that I think the Roman Empire disappeared, but there were parts of Romanized Britain that remained Romanized, while others sort of fell back to a kind of more Celtic way, but Romanized Celtic. But they kind of de-emphasized that, became decentralized, and new forms of social organization kind of threw up from it. And then she's saying that then this wealthy area attracted immigrants of all kinds from all different parts of Europe, including Germanic speakers, and that the dominance linguistically of Germanic language does not evidence that that was the main thing. And the problem with Anglo-Saxon from her perspective is it kind of emphasizes one ethnicity when really there were so many ethnicities, including, of course, she has to point out the North Africans of the Roman Empire, because we know that Middle Easterners from North Africa, like Arabs, but they might not have spoken Arabic because, whatever, it's before the Arabic invasion, but as far as ethnically terms, nowadays we'd call them Arabs, whatever. Anyway, there were some of those stationed in Britain. Therefore, we can assume that they were just as important in Anglo-Saxon England, right? Even though we haven't got very much evidence of that. Well, we know that there were foreigners, like from Syria as well. Like the Roman Empire spread a long way, and they positioned soldiers everywhere. But she said, oh, of course, it probably, settled and remained in Britain, and Britain was a multicultural place afterwards. My own opinion is that most of the Romans probably left, whether they be of Italian or Syrian origin, they left. And that I can back up by the fact that there was, the first time the legions were announced that they were going to be sent there, they rioted. Legions did not want to go there. They went there because they were forced to. It was the frontiers of the empire, so it wasn't a good place to be stationed. And the other reason we can say quite conclusively that they didn't leave any legacy is because there is no legacy. British people, Welsh people, if we can use the Welsh as an example of what England would be like if it wasn't for the Anglo-Saxons anyway, they don't have any Arabic DNA. Or even Italian. Let's say if at the moment the British genome, whether you include the people with Anglo-Saxon DNA or the people who don't, like the British Isles in general, it's pretty much exactly where you expect it to be. It's more northerly shifted than French people are, and slightly more westerly shifted, and there's more Western hunter-gatherers than the Scandinavians. I mean, it's exactly where it is geographically. If you took a modern day British person and he had an Italian wife, like my sisters, for example, my half sisters have an Italian mother, so they wouldn't plot anywhere near the British plot, because Italians are long way genetically away from England in terms of Europe. So they would plot probably like a French person, or at least southern France, someone from south of France at least, or maybe northern France, depending on what part of Italy the person came from. So, but we don't plot like that in Britain, because we don't have any Italian DNA, or if it's very trace amounts, let alone Arab DNA. We would be a completely different genetic grouping then. There is none. And I'm not talking about like 23andMe tests. I'm not talking about like commercial testing where they just look at, match your DNA with an autosomal DNA with like existing populations. I'm talking about like the overall, genome-wide analysis of ancient samples, like deep dive, high granularity analysis. It's not very much there. I mean, there's some trace amounts of Mediterranean DNA, but not much. So that just falls flat. So I expect they all left. However, they were there, and here's another article, another thing to back me up and disprove her nonsense. Okay, we've had this one. I'll shut some of these tabs so I don't get confused. So this one's from Martiniano et al. Genomic signals of migration and continuity in Britain before the Anglo-Saxons. And it's from 2016. And it points out, we did find one Roman era skeleton shows a clear signal of exogenous origin with affinities pointing towards the Middle East, confirming the cosmopolitan character of the empire even at its northernmost fringes. Certainly in the Roman period, there were such people in Britain. But what happened to their DNA? It's just not found later on in the migration era. It's just not there. And when they look at here, it says 9 ancient genomes of individuals from northern Britain, 7 from a Roman era York cemetery, bookended by earlier Iron Age and later Anglo-Saxon burials. And what they see is the Roman genomes show an affinity with modern British Celtic people. That means particularly the Welsh. That's exactly what you'd expect, right? If you believed in the Anglo-Saxon invasion, then the pre-Anglo-Saxon British people of Roman Britain would be pretty much like the Welsh, and they are. But they're significantly diverged from populations from Yorkshire and other Eastern English samples. I think they're talking about contemporary populations in Yorkshire and other English settlements. So that means there was some, either that or they're talking about later Anglo-Saxon ones. They also show similarity with earlier Iron Age genomes, suggesting population continuity. That means that the Roman Empire, with all its multiculturalism, it still meant that was genetic continuity from the Iron Age into the Roman era anyway. So if you took a British Celt from the late days of the Roman Empire, and he would be exactly the same as a British Celt from before the Romans arrived, they were not very different, even though they had immigrants around them from the Middle East It didn't make a difference. But they differ very much from the later Anglo-Saxon genome. Why is that? Because there is an influx of Germanic DNA. Now, all of this stuff in this paper from 2016 is exactly what people always believed, historians always believed. That's what I've believed as a historian. This is what the sources tell us. This is what Bede tells us. This is what Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us. This is what the Celtic sources like Geoffrey of Monmouth tells us. This is what the Roman sources tell us. This is what the sources all say. That's what they say. There's no sources supporting this this theory of Oosthuizen and of this multicultural happy clappy, whatever. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's a fantasy. It is nonsense. And now I think I've dealt with that. I mean, it's really the place of an archaeologist to go into more detailed theory about why her talk about the material culture being not Germanic, to talk more about why that is nonsense. And I have called on archaeologists to do so, because it's your responsibility. If you're an archaeologist, please do dismiss this stuff, because it doesn't go away otherwise. They will ride roughshod over the truth if they're allowed to carry on. And literally, anyone in 2019 who wants to talk about historical migrations without referencing the past 10 years of population genetics is a charlatan. I'm sorry, Susan, but you're a charlatan. Unless you understand the science of population genetics, which is the science of human migrations, you have no business talking about historical migrations. You can't. Your knowledge of material culture is worthless in the context of what we now know. I am not a geneticist. I have only studied genetics in my spare time because I have understood that this science has revolutionized what we understand about historic migrations. You cannot talk about historic migrations without looking at this evidence anymore. It's not possible. This is the future of understanding the history of human migration. It's genetics. So get with the times. Current year. All right. Now we're done with the archaeology. And also I explained the DNA thing because the DNA is important to remember. Like, we know that the Anglo-Saxon migration happened. We know that it was the migration of Germanic peoples. Although, when I say the Anglo-Saxon migration, what I say, if I could say more specifically, we know that the mass migration of Germanic-speaking peoples into the British Isles after the Roman Empire occurred. And we know that eventually they were termed by some Anglo-Saxons, but the word English, spelt with E-N-G-L-I-S-C in those days, was also used, and that they both meant exactly the same thing. English meant all the Germanic peoples of the British Isles prior to the Vikings. The Vikings were not included under that banner at all, but that's later. But all the Germanic-speaking peoples of the British Isles who arrived in the migration era and possibly before, during the Roman Empire, because there were probably there definitely were some Germanic-speaking Roman soldiers who settled. We have the genomes of some gladiators who are clearly Scandinavian. And we also have from York skulls of traders from the Baltic area, from Scandinavia and stuff. So Germanic people have been coming into Britain before the migration era. But evidently they brought their cousins in en masse in the migration era. And that they weren't all Angles and Saxons, they were Jutes, whatever, Frisians, a lot of Frisians. Probably the most overlooked category of Germanic migrants to the British Isles was the Frisians. But the term Anglo-Saxon has become the main one. And that's a medieval term. It was used several times in those times. But English was also very popular, and that's become the one that we also use now to describe ourselves. But those were originally synonyms. They didn't have any. There was no difference in the meaning at all. They meant exactly the same thing. You wouldn't refer to anyone on the continent as Anglo-Saxon. You wouldn't refer to anyone on the continent as English. So the term Anglo-Saxon and English both refer to the Germanic peoples of the British Isles. Many of the terms that the people on the continent came to use to refer to the English are, like the word English itself, derived from the word Angle for the Angles. Even today they call England Inglaterra or whatever, Angleterre in France. These kind of words. The exception being the Celts. They call us Sassenach, which comes from Saxon. And in Scotland, it's even used as a pejorative to refer to people from lowland Scotland. Why would people use these names if there were never Anglo-Saxons? Simply wouldn't, would they? But I mean, obviously, even Bede, who understands that Angles and Saxons weren't the only Germanic people coming. It's not some new revelation to say that there weren't just Angles and Saxons. Anglo-Saxon is a hyphenated term to just cover all of them, not just Angles and Saxons, all the Germanic people, in distinction to the Celtic-speaking people. And later on, this identity was shored up by medieval propagandists like Alfred, Bede, Asser, and finally Avelstan. They did make England, and then it was not necessary only to construct Englishness in opposition to the Celticness, but rather to construct Englishness in opposition also to the paganness of their Germanic, the new coming Germanic, the next wave of Germanic immigrants, the Vikings, who were still pagan. So you had to be Christian, but not like Christian like a Celt, and Germanic, but not pagan like a Viking, to be an Englishman. So it was that kind of, between two worlds thing. But it was, you can say what you like about propaganda and constructing identities, and it's all imaginary or whatever, but it was a real thing. People understood it well enough to know that they were English, and it wasn't entirely manufactured. It caught on quite well, and it's been very successful. We all know an Englishman when we see one. We can tell, a dog knows his own. And we're a historic identity. The term Anglo-Saxon is not just referring to a historic time in the post-Roman Britain. It also refers to an ethnicity, which is where some of the controversy comes in that I'm going to go into. The ironic thing is that while Anglo-Saxon and English were originally synonyms, they ceased to be for a while, and then the term Anglo-Saxon becomes instead a historical term to refer to the early English, and then we use the term English to refer to the people, the same people. It's not like the change or anything when the Normans come. It's the same people. So that continues in use, but Anglo-Saxon is revived in the modern era, not just as a historical term to refer historically to that era, but as an ethnonym to refer not exclusively to the English, but to the wider world of English-speaking peoples. So that means the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians, and the English. So when you historically, like until recently, if you said, "Oh, the Anglo-Saxon people, Anglo-Saxon media, or Anglo-Saxon economics," these kind of terms, you're not referring to England. You're referring to England and America, England and Australia. And that's partly why the controversy is arisen, because they consider that some racist stuff happened in America, these anti-racist days or something. But the funny thing is, right-wing people, I've noticed this happen over the past 3 years, have started to use the term Anglo to mean English again, which hasn't happened since medieval times. So they say they say stuff like, there's a meme called Eternal Anglo, but that only refers to English people or even British people, which is very, very strange, because that is not what that hasn't been the case for a long time. And I think that's just accidental from people they recognize that English people see the Anglo-Saxons as foundational to their identity, so they refer to the English as Anglos. And in France, I believe Anglo could sometimes be used as a pejorative to refer to British as well. But I'm talking about English speakers in America. English speakers in America use it. And also in America, Anglo and Anglo-Saxon have been used as a pejorative within America historically to refer to wealthy people who attend country clubs, who have smart haircuts and speak properly. People, so people who are jealous of them for being civilized call them Anglos. Somehow that's meant to be offensive to them. I don't know why they would be offended by that. But now, instead of referring to more civilized Americans, it refers to British people again, or at least among certain internet circles anyway. So it's just interesting how that term as an ethnonym is naturally evolving over time. But everyone understands, in whatever context they use it, that its original meaning was for migrations of Germanic-speaking peoples to the British Isles after the Roman Empire, who formed a distinct identity, which became known as English and Anglo-Saxons, and later the English has become perfectly acceptable to refer to these people. So I have no, to me, I don't call myself an Anglo-Saxon, I call myself English. I wouldn't see the point in saying Anglo-Saxon because it has extra syllables and it means precisely the same thing. And also it's useful to refer to Anglo-Saxons as historical different thing when I talk about Anglo-Saxon kingship as opposed to British kingship or something, or like the English monarchy. And when I'm referring to the English monarchy, then I might be referring to something from the 1500s or even the 1900s. But if I refer to Anglo-Saxon kingship, specifically I'm referring to the early medieval era. So as a historian, it's more useful to have that distinction. But I also understand how a lot of British people like to refer to themselves as Anglo-Saxons, and I don't see any problem with that. It's not at all controversial to me because, Chinese people still call themselves Han, the same ethnicity as, ancient Han, and Turks still call themselves Turks or whatever. It's the normal thing. That's how ethnonyms work. People use the historic ethnonyms that their ancestors used to describe themselves. That's what people do. I don't understand why certain PC academics can't understand that. It's a quite evident thing. If you have even the most cursory understanding of anthropology, you understand that that's what ethnonyms are for. They connect you to your ancestors. And you can find any tribe from Australian Aboriginals to like the earliest civilizations of mankind, like from China, India, or whatever. That's what people do. So why are they so surprised when English people do it? Let's go and analyze the minds of these kinds of people a little bit in more detail. I'll try not to get too upset because I admit this is a subject that is deep, close to my heart. So I could be prone to a little bit of emotion, and I don't want to be unprofessional here. Let me just check the chat in case any super chats come in. Oh, yes, thank you very much. Nicola Kale, very kind, for $2. $2 from Alfred. Those who control the past control the future. That's 1984. Well said. And $2 from Aaron Stiles. Thank you very much. I hope you're all enjoying the improved stream quality now that I've got a new internet connection. Should be better. It went to great lengths to get this installed. It was very difficult, believe me. So, how far in are we now? All right. Now's the difficult stage. So, the banning of Anglo-Saxon. Should we ban the word Anglo-Saxon? I did a post about this when I learned about it. So that other stuff happened talking about material culture. This is all completely separate, allegedly. But it's also in academia, and it also happened in September, late September, all within a couple of weeks of each other. There is a terrible new development in medievalism, a push from Marxist activists to completely ban the use of the word Anglo-Saxon, or the term Anglo-Saxon. It started with a left-wing grievance monger called Rambaran Olm, complaining that Anglo-Saxon was racist and exclusionary, and that Anglo-Saxon studies are too white. Her blogs and complaints resulted in the International Society of Anglo-Saxonists, aka ISAS, having a vote about changing their name. The result is that they have decided they will. Associated Twitter accounts have preemptively blocked me on Twitter before I even engaged them in discussion. I think they knew what I would say. Rembrandt Alm had already announced her resignation as vice president of ISAS in September, which caused a great stir and got the cancel culture machine into full rampage mode. All the outrage and the hatred, all the bile, all the spitting pink-haired venom was starting to bubble up, and they were getting ready to call for something to be banned, and when they do that, people capitulate. As the second vice president of ISAS, Mary Rembrandt-Alm indulged the researchers with allowing papers to be submitted with titles like Myth-Making the Anglo-Saxon, Settler Colonialism, White Supremacy and Medieval Heritage Politics, which was by Adam Miyashiro, an associate professor of English at Stockton University. And conference attendees got to hear lectures such as one from Leslie Spear, distinguished professor of archaeology at the University of New Mexico, who said, had a title and was a talk, The Middle Ages in New Mexico, a perspective from Chaco Canyon. Rembrandt-Alm's research interests include race and critical race studies in Anglo-Saxon studies in the post-colonial Caribbean. Race and critical race studies in Anglo-Saxon studies in the post-colonial Caribbean. She has or is writing monographs such as Race in Early Medieval England, which aims to enhance our understanding of race, othering, and their relationship to various religious groups spanning the entirety of early medieval England, which articulates Rembrandt-Alm's view that early English studies, formerly known as Anglo-Saxon studies, is both founded on and operates within the parameters of white supremacy. So that's what we're dealing with, one of these types of people. I'll show you some of the articles that I encountered. So, yeah, it's more than a name. Here's September 20th on Inside Higher Education. The International Society of Anglo-Saxons voted to change its name. Someone says, here we got a message from Irina Dumitrescu, a professor of English and Medieval Studies at the University of Bonn in Germany, publicly resigned from the advisory board of ISAS in solidarity with Rembrandt-Alm in her resignation letter. So she got the ball rolling and everyone just, started doing it. Like, because at first they didn't agree. At first they didn't agree to change the name. They dared resist her grievance mongering. They dared not change the name of the Anglo-Saxon Studies, International Society for Anglo-Saxon Studies, to remove the word Anglo-Saxon. And as a result, they got their way. They stomped their feet. They stomped and screamed and screamed and screamed until they got their way. And that is how it works nowadays. That's how these people work, and no one ever resists them. I can resist them, of course, because they don't have any power over me, but I have very little power. And that's why the people who have power offer no resistance. Here's one of her articles on Medium. Anglo-Saxon Studies, Early English Studies, she's put in her little... I have literally no problem with the idea of early English. Because early English, English is an ethnic group and Anglo-Saxon is an ethnic group. It's the same ethnic group. And by using early English, you admit that Anglo-Saxon is the beginning of the English ethnicity, the earlier form of the English of the history of the English race. So I have no problem with that. But obviously they are using English in they don't even see English as an ethnic term. They see it as a nation. So don't be deceived by that. But as I say, I literally have no problem with using the term English and Anglo-Saxon interchangeably. But Anglo-Saxon is useful for a variety of reasons. When you're studying history, it would be a bit more confusing to use the term early English all the time. I'm one of the only active scholars of colour specialising in early medieval England. Why is that a problem? Why should that be a problem? Is the absence of Eskimos in African American studies a problem? I have not seen anyone calling for more Eskimos in African American studies. Of course, I can say these. I know, this argument I'm using is facile. But it's logically sound. It's just cliched now because you've heard this a million times. Like they only attack it when there's a question of white identity. Anything where there's a native English speaking, the term native used quite quite loosely there. The idea, the field is too white, blah blah blah. Why is the field so white? White bad, white bad, white bad, white bad. White people are bad. We need to have less white people. That's what it all comes down to. It's bad when white people do stuff. It's good when non-white people do it instead. That's the basis of it. There's nothing deeper. There's no deeper intellectual meaning to it. It's that simple. They don't like white people. And here is the grovelling capitulation of the International Society of Anglo-Saxonists. We are interested in the language and history of England. Serious discussions about changing the name for 2 years. A vote has been held and the results announced, and we're going to do whatever you like. Just don't call us racist, please. Oh, well, there you go. Who resisted? The resistance was quite feeble, to be honest. As you can expect, as I say, most people just don't go for it. They won't stick their neck out. If you've got tenure, why would you risk losing it? You've got no other chance of a job anyway. If you put all your money into getting an expensive degree, you put all your life working really hard for a really competitive position to get into a university, and you're not going to stick your neck out then and throw it all the way for something as unimportant as ethics. It's just, I'm sorry, that's the reality of academia now. Like, there are probably academics who believe everything I've said, they agree with me 100%, but they're not going to risk it all. And I can sympathise in a way. You might have children, you've got mouths to feed, but, if people had some balls, then this wouldn't be in this problem in the first place with these Rambert and Holmes. If you just stand up for what's right. So there were some left-wing academics. Another left-wing academic who got angry that the ISIS board didn't go along with it first was Dr. Margie Housley. She got really annoyed that they didn't, and a lot of them went on Twitter academics saying, why don't they ban Anglo-Saxon? Why don't they do what she says? We need more people of colour to do whatever. So the woke performative outrage culture, it grows because if you're in the university, if you're a part of it and you see a woman of colour not getting her way, then you have a massive opportunity to be a goodie by leaping her to defence. So if you're a pink-haired white woman, then you've got always this problem that you're white, and you're always going to be a little bit like, oh, I wish I wasn't white. So you can try and compensate for that by leaping to the defence of whatever nonsense some woman of colour happens to say, if it's within an academic context, and then you can portray yourself as some kind of hero or some on the right side of history. They use his Trotskyite terminology like this. They really believe it. They're fucking mad. The ban's gathering momentum. Of course, you can't ban a word right off the bat. It won't happen like that. I'm not stupid. I know they haven't got that power. But that's how it starts, First, you get a few organizations to not use it. Then academics discourage their students from using it. They mark down their students for using the term Anglo-Saxon in an essay about Anglo-Saxons. And this, gathers steam and it becomes the norm within that field. And then media reporting on it will take the cues from the academics and they will stop using the word Anglo-Saxon. And before you know it, it becomes a cultural norm. That is what is termed the culture industry. That is what is called the manufacture of consent by Noam Chomsky. That's how it works. And so if you ignore the inner workings of academia now at your own peril, because this is how consent is manufactured. They people who are, what about the people who reject, the academics who reject? Okay, well, they do it on this basis. Like, okay, I admit it's racist, right? But it's still okay because it's quite useful, which, as I've said as well, but it is useful, but I don't think it's racist, and I don't care. So one such flimsy attempt to defend the term Anglo-Saxon came from quite respected archaeologist, Professor Howard Williams, and he's on Twitter as ArchaeoDeath. And he has written this article October 16th. And basically, he is someone who he goes on, gives his background. He is someone who has been consistently critical of the term Anglo-Saxon and its limitations and how it can, not always be illuminating to discuss ethnicity in early Britain or blah, blah, blah. And also it might offend Welsh people or something. I don't know. Some stuff I don't give a monkeys about. But then he says, anyway, even though I think all this, I also am against a blanket ban of the term, which is actually good that he's against the blanket ban. But actually, they're not calling for a blanket ban yet. They're just calling for, all they said is that it's racist and it shouldn't be used in this context as a name of this Angus and the society. But obviously, he's correctly surmised that this is where this is going, and it will lead to a blanket ban. And he's jumped the gun and said we shouldn't have a blanket ban, but if you admit it's racist, then if you're saying you think it's a racist word, then it doesn't matter. You've lost the argument already. You've already accepted all the premises of their argument, and anything else you say is flimsy. Whether you consider it to be useful, they'll say, "Oh, is it useful? But that it belittles people of colour and excludes them from the field." They use the new term "medievalists of colour" now. Medievalists of colour, or mock, quite fitting. I think the mock, for they are mocking us. Medievalists of colour. Okay, close this and close this. What have we got on Twitter? These are some of the people who have blocked me. I have no idea. I've never spoken to them ever, but they've blocked me already, which is flattering, really. I'm an Anglo-Saxon. No, you're not. Okay, you can see what their concerns are. Someone, early medieval English humanist. Yuck. Speak to me in gifs and we'll be friend. She, her, hers. Oh, pronouns listed. These are the types of people we have in academia. These are the people who are deciding what is and isn't okay for us, words we can use. Deranged. Here they have this thread from Eric Wade. Eric Wade, graduate fellow, he's studying in German university. My project examines how literary depictions of medieval sexuality were shaped by the diverse cultural interactions that characterized the early medieval English period. I wonder if they changed that since the controversy, or whether he was ahead of the curve. I analyze the transmission of medieval exotica narratives and collections, many of them translated or derived from non-English texts. These range from a forged letter from Alexander the Great describing India to an Egyptian saint's life. In these descriptions of the wonders of the world, produced a geography of the world that also served as a spatialized account of Christendom and its sexual, racial others. I study how translated literature paradoxically became the basis for a sense of English identity, while English-produced texts imagined sexual and racial others elsewhere in order to shore up this identity. I argue that this English identity was based on categories of quotation marks, categories of the natural and unnatural that serve to morally differentiate sexual practices and differentiate different identities. In addition, I argue that depictions of sexual practices function as a form of racialization in Anglo-Saxon texts, producing hierarchy of humanity with Christians at the top and center. Okay, so the idea, even this, he hasn't used the word Anglo-Saxon to describe all this Anglo-Saxon stuff, but even so, like, the word English is used in scare quotes. Obviously, they're not comfortable with English anyway, and he's also saying that there's racialization in Anglo-Saxon texts. Oh, they can say Anglo-Saxon there, actually, sorry. He did use Anglo-Saxon. So whether they get rid of the way they study history is the way that, the Frankfurt School encouraged people to study texts, like all text, like it's a critical theory. It's not really learning and understanding. It's just, looking for things to complain about. It's basically like being what we used to call a crybaby, And it's quite an accurate thing. It's not really being an academic. It's not being an intellectual. It's being a fucking... Well, I don't need to be too rude anyway. So what's he said about this? He's wading in onto this conversation. Anglo-Saxon, the claim that the Anglo-Saxon Jutes and so on used it to identify themselves. People are saying that it is a neutral term that these people used. Well, how many times do you think it appears in Old English sources? 3, okay? There's only 3 times that the actual, hyphenated term Anglo-Saxon comes. So what? And it also says it's used in Latinized context. Latinized, not meaning in Latin, because it's an Old English text, but he's saying that it's a Latinate genre. Doesn't really have any relevance at all. That has no relevance at all to his usefulness as an ethnonym for the time. Early English is, as I say, I really don't have a problem with the term early English. The ones from English authors, a lot of people like Bede use the term English as well, so why not use English? Fine, I don't mind. I really don't mind the term English, but the problem is that it's less illuminating. Like we have a tradition of hundreds of years of scholarship now where we refer to the early English period as Anglo-Saxon, and it becomes awkward to refer to a 200-year-old text or a 100-year-old text without that. Why make this jump? Basically, what is the actual... this isn't really the source of his argument. Here he gets to his real argument. It's that, and then suddenly after that, it gets used in a racist way in America or something. So here it comes to. In the 19th century, it becomes racist. Whoa! I don't know what's so racist about it, but the English and American people and their destiny. Wait, the term English and American are used here in the exact same context as Anglo-Saxon. So how is it okay then? If using Anglo-Saxon here is what makes it racist, then how is it then okay to switch it for English? It's completely illogical. It's completely illogical. See also other thread, blah, 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 blah. This is nonsense. This is complete trash. This is not academic. This is just... okay. Sorry. Oh my goodness. Helicopter parent to a kitty. Queer. Studying sex, race and Old English literature. PhD. Okay, wow. There you go. You get the idea. You get the idea what kind of people we're dealing with here and what their concerns are and what their motivations are. They do not care about coming to a correct understanding of historical events. History is not for them what it should be, which is either trying to understand events as they happened and trying to, secondly, to use the truth of history as a way to inform our lives and understand who we are. They don't care. Obviously, besides all the material culture I've already discussed and the genetics I've already discussed, the language, the place names, everything changed. Everything went Germanic. The Germanicization of Britain happened. There was a massive Germanization of the country. Whether that happened, whatever you want to imagine happened. If you don't want to say there was an invasion, which I think there was, if you want to say for some reason all the Celts just dug holes, put their heads into the sand, and let the Germanic peoples come and take over, you can believe that if you want. I don't care. But whatever you believe, the place names all got made Germanic, the language all got made Germanic, the blood was substantially Germanized, maybe up to as much as 50% in some places, and England was born, and Englishness was the ethnicity that we have since been known by for the last 1500 years. We are English. We're English, and we're not going away. We're not going to go anywhere. If you try and write us out of history, it's not going to work. And the more people find out about what you're doing in academia, the less credible academia becomes, the more laughable it becomes. The field of medieval history is becoming a joke. You're not helping yourselves. You're not going to achieve some kind of Marxist homosexual utopia or whatever it is you think you're going to make. It's never going to happen. You're just going to make people angry, and that won't help you. No, that won't help you at all. Oh, I don't like this. I don't like this. Don't like living in these times sometimes. I really don't. Let me just say I call on all conscientious academics, whether medievalists or otherwise, historians, archaeologists, please make a public stand against this kind of thing right now. Whether it be this specific phenomenon or the next one, because they keep coming one after the other. I know that you will. I know I can say that I'm someone who's outside academia. I'm not within the world of academia, so I can take risks that you don't. You can't. You think you can't, but I really also have to make it clear that because of the fact I'm outside academia, because people can just dismiss me as some fringe extremist or something like that, they'll try and use whatever flimsy arguments they can to dismiss me. That means it really is, you have a responsibility if you're in academia to speak up against these things, because what will happen if you don't is going to affect you. You think that you can hide from this, you think that you can go along with it, and that eventually they'll just leave you alone. It will one day. They won't. One day it's calling for no more Anglo-Saxon use of the word Anglo-Saxon, so they can encourage people of colour to enter the field. Next, they'll have, what if they find out that they have a requirement that if a certain amount of students of colour don't take a course, then it will be eliminated automatically. And obviously, it's never going to be as attractive to people of colour, because it concerns our history, the native English people's history. It's our history. And if you cringe a little bit at that, think that when I said our, that was that attempt to possess a history and exclude other people, that there was something malicious and cruel in that, then you need to analyze properly your biases. That exact sentiment is expressed by all people all over the world quite naturally and without any malice, without any intention of being cruel to other people. It's simply stating a fact. This is our history. We own it in our blood and in our culture. It's not an attack on anyone else for us to assert ourselves. You need to make the stand. If you're in academia, this is on you. I really can't stress that enough. And if you don't, it's only a matter of time before they kick you out of your position, probably anyway. So you will have sacrificed your ethics for nothing, for a few more months of tenure or whatever. And will you ever forgive yourself? So I'll just go through I got a few more super chats. What I got: Nate the Ape, $2. Has academia lost all legitimacy at this point? Despite all I've just said, no. I think academia is important. If I didn't, I wouldn't have bothered to attack it. I would go along with the people who just say, just ignore, they're just silly people. A lot of people say, yeah, silly people, just ignore them. Don't ignore them. Don't ignore them. They didn't ignore academia, and the people who made academia become what it is, they didn't ignore it. We can't ignore it. We can't ignore this. £2 from Frank Slater. Did the Anglo-Saxons kill or breed the Iceni, etc.? Well, we as for kill, obviously they killed some people because killing was common in those times. We can't say precisely how many people were killed because we don't have any way of getting accurate figures for that. But we do know that they definitely did interbreed, but we can't say how much that happened either. Just because someone, a modern region of Britain is 40% Anglo-Saxon, doesn't mean that that region had 40% Anglo-Saxons and 60% Celts. That's not how genetics works. It could have been quite different, and then, for example, now medieval Icelanders had a lot more Irish blood than modern Icelanders, but over time the Norwegian blood has become more common in the gene pool. So it may be that something like that's happened in England too. Anyway, did the Anglo-Saxon... Oh, we've done that one. Leo the Bumtickler. I wish I didn't have to read some of these names. $10. Thank you very much, Leo. Yo, boss, love your work. Also, it's concerning that these white people are afraid of other white people for being called racist. Wonder who put the fear in them. Social pressure, isn't it? People respond very, very strongly to social pressure. All people do. $5 from Monster Kill. Hey, bro. What do you think about Nick Fuentes? Never watched him. Not really interested. Cono, $4.99. Thank you very much, Cono. Love your channel, your personality, and your passion. Please, people like you are rare in academia and in life. I wish you best and keep fighting. Thank you very much for your kind words, Connor. And £5 from Thor's Treat. Thank you very much for that too. Oh yeah, I've got more now. Oh, Henry Walker, £2. I'm a WHG supremacist. I have the phenotype. Dark skin, blue eyes, is it? You know who has that phenotype? The dingo posting meme. The Australian shit posting meme. $4.99 from Corbett Plastering Incorporated. I've heard they have completely abandoned the study of intelligence in the US. Well, that's a shame. Do you mean genetic study of intelligence? Well, I don't know very much about behavioural genetics, actually, so I can't tell you if that's true or not. Sorry. But it's a shame if it's the case. Wolf Marauder, $2. Tolkien is rolling in his grave. I expect he is. He was Professor of Anglo-Saxon Studies. Or would he have accepted the term Professor of Early English Studies? I think he would have thought it was a bit silly. 300 Norwegian kroner from Andreas Cortes. I love your work and keep spreading the wisdom. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you very much for kind words. Oh, well, I can tell you a bit before I finish about the Anatolia film. I think it's going to be really good. It looks like it's going to be about 1 hour long. If you want to see it as soon as possible, then sign up now to be a patron on Patreon or Subscribestar, because I am going to make it available to patrons for several days before anyone else, so you'll get to see it first. And also, you also get to see a load of streams like this one that are only available ever for my patrons. So I do some content. I make some content exclusively just for my special patrons, because I rely on you. That this is my only job now. This is what I live on. So if you want me to keep doing it, then please become a patron and help me out, or send me a donation on PayPal or whatever you like. The links are all in the description to this. But I reward you in return with special videos and preview access to my new film, The In Search of the Earth Mother of Anatolia, and I think it's going to be really good because I got a new camera for it. I've been using a 60D since 2016. Now I got an 80D, and I got a new lens, an expensive lens, and I got a shoulder mount for more steady shots. So I put a lot of time into it to make it better. I even got a waterproof cover for the camera so I could take it underwater and get some shots of fish, which was probably not majorly relevant for the film, but I did it anyway just because I thought it's fun. Okay. I'm really tired now. I think I've worn myself out with getting angry. But I just will read the remaining super chats and then I'll go to bed. Adam Strahan, $5. Thank you very much, Adam. I'm an American, but my ancestry is English, I think. It's really awesome what you are doing and standing up for your people. It inspires me. I'm really glad to hear that, Adam. I hope that I hope it does. I hope that my work helps people. That was always my intention since I started doing, especially I started doing history videos around 2010. I think 2010, 2011, I started doing Anglo-Saxon, specifically Anglo-Saxon language videos. If you scroll through some of the oldest ones, you'll see it's me visiting Rathwell Cross, me reading Old English, and I just thought this is a really important part of English history, and it's really important for our identity as English people to know about Anglo-Saxon England. So, and that's the argument I put forward in From Ruins to Ruin too. So that's why you can see I'm getting quite upset about what's happening. L Monk, £5 donation. I think we need to teach more Anglo-Saxon history in school. What would you add to the curriculum? Most kids haven't even heard of Æthelstan. Yeah, I would definitely say Æthelstan. I think Anglo-Saxon England, they should know about the migration era, and they should know about the coming of the Anglo-Saxons. They should know about the religion of the Anglo-Saxons and what came, and they should know also about how it was formed, like how Bede and Alfred were contributors to the idea of Englishness, and how it was then formed in a political reality later on by Alfred's grandson, and then they should also know about how that links up with later ideas of Englishness, and how we've always referred back and back, even throughout history. There's always been an idea that from before the Norman conquest there was a sense of Englishness that we're getting back to, and that's always been remembered. It's always been part of our consciousness, and it's there in the landscape, it's there in our language, and it's there in our popular imaginations, in our poetry and songs and everything. And we're always hearkening back to it in some sense. That would be excellent, I think, if every English child knew about that. Any evidence? £2 from Frank Slater. Any evidence of Anglo-Saxon psychedelic use? No, there's none. Items. Okay. I've got through all the questions now, so I think it's good time to end. Well, good night, everyone, and please keep an eye out for the Anatolia documentary. I might have it done before the end of the month, but maybe I won't. There is also an artist working on some special artwork for it too, so I have to wait for that to come through. Okay, good night, everyone, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to share this, click subscribe, and please become a patron on Patreon or Subscribestar. Good night.